Welcome back for our second episode about Firefall. Time to get to the good stuff. Why this game will be quite different than what we've seen before, if they can manage to execute on what they're planning at Red 5. Today we'll be talking about what they call staged content. I would have gone with awesome storyline unlocks, but I guess when you're trying to pitch ideas, sometimes you need to make things sound a little more formal or whatever. The basic concept behind staged content is actually pretty straightforward, but it throws everything we know about MMOs on its head. You see, most big MMORPGs deliver content to you as fast as the developers can build it, but that's not exactly how Firefall's gonna work. In order to give the players agency over the world, in order to allow the players to have a real impact on the world they're playing in, towns, dungeons, entire zones will only open up if the players achieve certain things in the game world. This may not seem like madness, but man, you should have seen James when he first heard about it. He walked in circles muttering to himself for a little while, had a little conniption fit, and then he finally declared, "I agree," before walking off. Why, you ask? Because they plan to implement this from the very outset of the game, by which I mean that more of the game will be made and ready to go than is immediately accessible to players right off the bat, solely for the sake of, hopefully, creating a deeper feeling of ownership over the world for the players. You see, it's established wisdom in the MMORPG industry that you must launch with as much content as you possibly can. I mean, how many times have you heard people say, "Oh, there's nothing to do" in a new MMO? Or read in a review that there's just not enough content at launch when considering a new massive multiplayer experience? Without enough content, players run out of things to do, and they drift off before you can even get your first major content patch out. And unfortunately, as the years have gone on, both players and reviewers have become less and less charitable about what an acceptable amount of initial content is, as they subconsciously compare every MMO that comes out to certain other MMORPGs that, in all fairness, kinda have an 8-year head start. This means, from the perspective of conventional wisdom, it's suicide to launch without letting your players access every little thing you've got. But that's exactly what they're doing for Firefall. So why did James eventually decide this made sense? Well, to understand that, we've got to talk a little bit more about exactly what staged content is. You know how in most MMORPGs, you grind some mobs, you kill a boss, see if you got any usable loot, and then you wait for them to respawn so you can do it again? Sooner or later, that loses all meaning. This takes you out of the world. Instead of fighting epic battles, you find yourself just taking actions by rote. Well, staged content gives player actions meaning again. In the Firefall world, there's something called the Melding. We'll talk more about it when we get into the Firefall mythos later, but for right now, you can just think of it as intergalactic death fog. Anyway, the Melding has taken over most of the world. Humans are just barely holding on. One city and a few acres of land is all that's left. But you, as players, can help push back the Melding, revealing lost zones, new monsters, even cities previously swallowed by it. So now, instead of just fighting a dragon and seeing if it drops something you can use, you might have a mission to destroy a group of generators. And though you and your entire party get wiped out at the end, you, with your last shot, take out that last generator. And when you wake up, you find that you've helped roll back the Melding and unveiled a new zone for everybody. And these aren't just restricted to individual quests. These are also group-wide efforts undertaken by the entire community. Say some part of the world temporarily rescued from the Melding might collapse, and while high-level members of the community might be tasked with guarding refugees and fighting off the hordes as the Melding reclaims the city around them, low-level members might have to gather supplies for the refugees to make sure they can survive when they get back to civilization. And when enough supplies have been gathered, and enough refugees have made it back to safety, thanks to the actions of the players, a new town may pop up in the very next patch, built and populated by the refugees you all worked so hard to defend. This should create a real sense of community. Everyone will be striving for the same goals, except when they're not, but we're not going to talk about that quite yet. But hopefully this system will help create the sort of bond that you just don't get in current MMOs. This will also actually stretch how much play people get out of a piece of content. Red 5 isn't a huge studio. It's no juggernaut to compete with some of the giants out there, so they have to find better ways to allow people to get more out of what they can build, and this is one of them. Instead of just blazing through all the content in the game like players usually do whenever a new patch or an expansion is released, people will have community-wide goals to work towards, which will allow everyone to get a lot more out of the content which is released. Basically, instead of incentivizing you to keep replaying the same content over and over, simply by making that breastplate you really want only drop 1 out of every 100 times you killed a specific monster, Firefall incentivizes you to stay by allowing you to help the community shape the world. When you choose to grind, you'll be grinding to help leave your mark on the Firefall universe, and determine which way the story goes. So even though in terms of raw polygons and geography and enemy types, Firefall probably won't have as much as other MMOs out there available from the start, staged content might be a way to make it all more meaningful, to give the player agency over their world and stretch out the life cycle of the content that's there. And that's why, in the end, even though it flies in the face of everything he's experienced in the MMO industry, James agreed with the decision. It's a huge risk, and it might not work out. People may leave before they realize just how the staged content thing works, or like anything new, it simply might not work the first time it's tried. But if they can get it right, staged content allows the folks at Red 5 to give the player a level of control over their world like we've never seen. Here's to hoping, because that is something we would love to see. Thanks for watching, we'll see you again soon.